Hi, I'm David Luong, and you're listening to Trek Rant, the Star Trek podcast where I rant, rave, overanalyze, and obsess about all things Trek. Basically, this is just a quick mini podcast which I'll be doing time to time, sometimes solo, sometimes with a guest, in between takes of the main Kid Clown Kicker podcast, the Geek Roundtable podcast, which you can also find on our YouTube page or at our official website, www.unitedgeekfederation.wordpress.com. These are just going to be mini bites, they're not going to be too long. Like I said, and they're going to be about Star Trek since, as I've mentioned in our main podcast before, I'm a huge Trekkie. That's kind of my main geek fandom, as it were. So it's the topic I'm most comfortable and most interested in talking about. So I hope you enjoy these just little mini raving lunatic monologues I'm going to give. In any case, basically I'm going to be talking about something that's been bothering me about Star Trek for a while now. Like I said, I consider myself a huge Trekkie. Actually, you've probably already figured that out by virtue of me recording a Star Trek-centric podcast. But in any case, one of the reasons that I love Star Trek is its whole optimistic, idealistic, utopian view of the world. This whole notion that we have this gigantic I was going to say multiracial, but I guess in the case of Star Trek, multi-species governing body, this whole utopian future where everybody gets along, there's no starvation, etc., which for a self-proclaimed lefty idealist like myself, I find that super appealing. That said, it's been pointed out to me recently by a number of online commentators, and by commentators I mean other geeks like me who are just online all the time talking about Star Trek. And by the way, I mean that in the most endearing way possible. I'm a geek, I totally admit it. So if you're a geek who's talking about Star Trek right now, right on. But in any case, something that's been brought up to me by a number of online commentators is the fact that throughout the 5 Star Trek television series and the movies and the whole the franchise as a whole, the United Federation of Planets, the main governing body of Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, etc., basically the good guys of the series, they're portrayed with slightly dictatorial undertones, and by that I mean almost like a military dictatorship. In other words, the Federation almost comes across like some gigantic, vast space military dictatorship. And I know that probably a few of you are listening to this are having the same reaction I had when I first heard that. It was like, nah, you got to be kidding with me. What the hell are you talking about? Star Trek's all about democracy and Western ideals and all that good stuff. But then basically, as I kept on reading more and more about people's arguments about it, they kept on gathering more and more evidence where I couldn't ignore the argument or shrug it off anymore. Just to provide you with some of the key arguments that other people have made in favor of the notion that the Federation is this vast military dictatorship. And by the way, just so nobody thinks I'm stealing anybody else's ideas, these are arguments that I've heard other people give and read off message boards. So these aren't all my ideas. These are just other people bringing out points. So just so I can put that out there. But in any case, some of the main arguments in favor of the notion that the Federation is this vast, horrible dictatorship is that when you look at the Federation and Starfleet vessels, the Federation comes across as incredibly ethnocentric, human first, basically an Earth first, human centric organization, despite being a nominally multiracial, or I guess I should say multi-species entity. So, for example, throughout the Star Trek series, yeah, you see aliens here and there, definitely as main characters and what have you. But really, for the most part, when you look at Starfleet personnel and who's crewing the ship and who the captains are and the admirals, and even Federation officials, for the most part, the vast majority of the time, they're humans, which is kind of weird when you consider that the Federation is supposedly this huge government body that stretches across multiple worlds, something like 150 worlds, I think, across the galaxy. So it's kind of hard to imagine that the majority, and we're not talking about just like the majority, we're talking about the vast majority of top brass in Starfleet, of Federation representatives, of people you see in in the main ships of the series could all come from a single planet. And yes, I know that there are a few notable exceptions to this. I know for sure somebody's going to point out in Star Trek 6, the president of the Federation was a non-human, or Admiral so-and-so from episode so-and-so was a Vulcan, or something to that effect. But you do have to admit, when you watch Star Trek, the vast majority of the time, when you see someone who's representing Starfleet, when you see someone who's representing the Federation, they're human. They're from Earth. So that's point one, that the Federation is incredibly human-centric, which I guess I'm going to take a little pause there. I guess that's not necessarily the definition of a dictatorship by itself, but it's certainly one of the elements you see in dictatorships a lot, that it is incredibly racially biased, as it were. The second argument I hear made a lot with regards to the Federation being this horrible dictatorship is that Starfleet, the military/naval arm of the Federation, I guess what equates to the Navy in the 22nd to 24th century, but Starfleet seems to have a disproportionately large amount of political power within the Federation. For example, in Next Generation, you get Picard, who's a Starfleet officer, basically someone who fulfills a military position. He makes tons of decisions independently of any civilian oversight. He'll talk with admirals, sure, but those guys in turn are getting directives from Starfleet. And I guess there's an argument to be made that the directions that the admirals are getting from Starfleet are in turn coming from some civilian government. But for the most part, and I do say for the most part because I know there's always an exception that you can point out, we don't really hear much of Picard or any admiral saying, well, I need to go talk to, my Federation representative, or I need to go talk to this member of the civilian government. You tend to get a lot of, this is a directive from Starfleet, or this is the operation that we as Starfleet need to do, and so on and so forth. Which is kind of surprising, again, just because you always get this argument that the Federation is supposed to be this huge democratic body, supposedly a civilian government, but then all the major decisions are made by military brass, basically without any civilian oversight. Again, kind of weird, especially when you look at Star Trek as a whole, especially the supposed main missions of the USS Enterprise, both during the Kirk era and the Picard era. The Enterprise really engages in a lot of diplomatic activity, but when you look at the main bridge crew of both the TOS and TNG Enterprises, they don't have any representatives of civilian government. So whenever they encounter a new alien species, or they have to negotiate with this or that planet, it's the military who's basically doing it on behalf of, again, supposedly a civilian government, which kind of comes off as strange, as a ship that's supposed to represent supposedly this whole utopian democratic society. So, based on those two main points alone, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you instantly came to the conclusion that the Federation is this sham democracy, and that the real power rests in the military dictatorship run by Starfleet. And I gotta admit, both of those are really compelling arguments. The only counter arguments I have are that, first off, with regards to point one, that the Federation is this human-centric society. First of all, I guess the quick, snarky answer to that is that they didn't have the special effects to make everybody on the ship look like an alien. That's the quick, snarky answer. I guess the other answer that you can put forth is that maybe the writers thought that if you had just a bunch of aliens in the background, that would be hard for the viewer to relate to those characters, just having a lot of non-humans out there. I don't know. Outside of that, I don't really know if I have a in-show theory as to why the Federation is so human-centric. Again, it does kind of come off as weird that humans, who, when you look at the grand scheme of Star Trek history, we were among the last species of the main, actually we were the last species of the main founders of the Federation to actually get warp drive, to basically enter the galactic community. and all of a sudden we're running the whole thing, it does kind of come off as strange. So I don't really have a great argument about why the Federation is so human/Earth centric. But with regards to point 2, that basically comes across that Starfleet has a lot of independent power, a power independent of any civilian government. I guess there's a pretty strong argument to be made that, first off, since captains who are out in deep space are so far off planet from the center of the Federation, that as captains are primarily going to be working with other military brass anyway. For someone who's a captain, you're probably rarely going to have them talk directly to, for example, the president of the United Federation of Planets. They're more likely to speak with admirals or other members of Starfleet. So that's point 1. Point 2, I guess, because they're so far away from the center of the Federation, maybe contact with the capital, in this case Earth, is more difficult. I don't know. And I guess the other argument I would make is that, and this is to me the most compelling argument, is that Starfleet isn't really a military organization that we think of in the sense of the real world 21st century definition of a military organization. Because when you really look at it, Starfleet throughout the series, it's basically kind of an amalgamation of, yes, it has Navy and military elements within it, but also has a lot of elements of scientific organizations like NASA, or basically the diplomatic corps. So when you look at Starfleet, yeah, it's easy to cynically say that it's a military organization, but when you step back and look at it from the perspective of the 22nd, 23rd, 24th century, it basically fulfills the function of being a scientific organization, a diplomatic organization, and yes, a military organization, but it's really an amalgamation of all three of those things. So while, yeah, Starfleet does seem to have a lot of independent power independent of the Federation, it does so with the authority that any other diplomatic corps in the modern day would have. At any rate, those are just some of the main arguments I've heard with regards to that. And those are just some of the counter arguments I could think off the top of my head. But I'm curious as to what you guys think. Is the Federation this multicultural, democratic, utopian society we've always been led to believe in the television show? Or is it this racist, humans first military dictatorship? Or is it somewhere in between? Let me know what you think. Leave a comment on this YouTube page or visit us at our official website at www.unitedgeekfederation.wordpress.com and post whatever your responses are. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast or if you enjoy any other podcast we're releasing, please subscribe on our YouTube page. And again, you can visit us on our website, www.unitedgeekfederation.wordpress.com. All right, thanks for listening. I'm David Luong. Take care.